All right. All right. Okay. You should go ahead and log in to Canvas if you have not. And then I have the, let's see, the resources for the Microsoft Excel cases. And I want to move us on. Again, we're moving fairly rapidly. And like I said, I front load things so that we can give you some flex time at the end if you might need. Regardless, to know where we are in terms of what you're going to need in terms of resources is always going to be this file, the resource for the Excel cases. Then I have one for the Access cases. Now again, let me just walk you through basically I explained to you over there in column B. I tell you the case that we're working on and then why we're doing it, which is going to be some type of skill or business problem that we're trying to work with. And then you'll see in column C are going to be old files that I've worked and reworked over the years and tweaked them. Now the lesson there, here's the lesson as far as these old case files I've played around with. There's always, every spreadsheet would ever produce can always be improved. It can always be made better. And a lot of times folks will create something and they'll just stop and leave it be. So I have that there so you can see as we work through those. Then there will be some times where I'll stop and say, you know, I probably could have done this better or that better to make sure that we take the data and we display them in a way that's meaningful enough that a person can make a decision with them. Because that's what this is all about, is about giving you tools for decision making. Now, when you go to work and you hear people talking about a dashboard and all that, that dashboard is going to be typically going to be some set of data that you can analyze, or links that will show you analysis of data or sets of data. For example, like how many orders did we have yesterday, or how many of our customers have called with a complaint, or who knows? It will depend upon what we call the KPI for a company. And those are key performance indicators. And that will be dictated by your level of reports, meaning, are you a first level person? Are you maybe in a larger company working with several reports under you, say maybe a regional manager, or are you the owner? And dashboards come in all shapes and sizes and types, but they essentially utilize spreadsheet technology and database technology to enable you to see how the company's performing. It's not any different than the dashboard on your car, okay? You have all of it. The average person who drives a car sees probably only 1/10,000th of all of the data that's floating around in a car. Today, cars are basically a piece of software on a chassis with an engine. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about sensors that provide. Let me give you an example. For engineers, understand that people can be really stupid when they drive, and people at times do not understand inertia or physics. So you'll see people out on the interstate. The interstate's clearly marked at this exit 20 miles an hour, and they'll have a little rollover. And I'll see people hit one of those exits. I know they're going 40 or 50. And so the engineering has been dumbed into those cars so that the car will save you from flipping and killing yourself. Now, if you hit it at 70 or 80, the car says, we're out of control here for sure. But most of those systems are stabilizing, and they're modeled a lot on what we have now in aircraft, what they call wire-to-wire. So you don't see all of the data that's going on and interacting in your vehicle, except for if I got gas, how fast am I going, and if you have a newer car, you might have some of that driver assist stuff, like is someone close to me, behind me. You might have little things in your in your side mirrors, it will light up if someone's too close to you, or if someone is close to you. You'll have some engine lights, things of that nature. So it's the same concept here with the dashboard. So we're looking at some of these different ways that we can try to make a decision about a company and what it's trying to tell us. Now, we worked on Dabney Financial Services, and in that we started working on a pro forma. And a pro forma is, the Latin word is P-R-O-F-O with a space, F-O-R-M-A, meaning for the sake of. A pro forma is a management tool. It's a way that we put together data to see what we might get in terms of possible results. Now, the valuable thing that we have with software, and we'll see this, is we do have the capability, if we build a mathematical model, that we can play around with the data and we can look at the possible outcomes. And you'll hear me say this over and over again. You'll get paid to make decisions. It'll be your job to ask some questions. One, the data that I have, how good are they? Two, do I have a reasonable understanding of how bad things could get, or how good things are get, or what I might normally expect given the constraints under which I operate, given the situation that I'm in? That's your job. And you try to make a decision on the basis of that. And that is why we spend so much time trying to acquaint you with these tools, so you understand what they can and cannot do for you. Now, when we looked at Dabney Financial Services, we looked at a couple of companies. We looked at Walgreens and we looked at CVS, and we compared them in terms of their performance using accounting ratios. And as you recall, as we worked through that, it was apparent that on the basis of the accounting ratios, these are kind of things like taking your temperature. I look at accounting ratios and say, like, you go get your blood work. And if there's an anomaly or something really bad, it'll show up. And so when we looked at those two companies, it was apparent that Walgreens looked a lot better. And so on the basis of that information, and then any current news I'd have, earnings calls that I heard or participated in, I would make an investment in them. And I'd be making an investment that was pretty wise and based upon the most correct or timely data that I have. Now, there are plenty of providers out there, Yahoo Finance, Bloomberg, Motley Fool, etc., who will dial up for you a company's financials. They will dial up for you their accounting ratios or key performance indicators versus their competitors versus the industry. So you can say how well did they do versus the people with whom they directly compete, and how well do they do versus the entire industry. Okay, so the whole crux of this is to get information that I can make a decision with. When we looked at Dabney, we were looking at that, and we also had mess around with some cell referencing, financial ratios, and now today we're going to look at XLS5, which is the town of Clintwood. Okay, it's XLS5, and this is a case in which we're going to look at a city that tries to do some forecasting about its budget. Okay, and we'll see that. Now that's going to be over in the files section of Canvas. So I'm going to diminish this for a moment and go back up here and go to Files. And we'll find Clintwood, hopefully. Ah, great. Okay, let me go through here. Yeah. We'll go down to the city of Clinton. It should be there. Merciful heavens. Why are you not on there? This blue sky. Maybe I have it under XLS5. I'm going to look there and see. I may have it also up. You take here's XLS5, okay, and I've got it as a work in process. That's good enough. Let's look at that. And it may also be over there in the if it's over there in the welcome, it ought to be over here too. So let's download this file, and it's a work in process file, which is okay, no big deal there. And let's download it to your desktop, and then save it there so when you need to, you can reload it back up. We'll pop that down there. Now you'll notice I've got it named WHIP because it was a work in process. I'm playing around with it. So, and we'll see that. And you should be able to see that file. Has everybody got it there? Find it? Okay. Let's talk about this in terms of how it's constructed, etc., and we'll go from there. This is a city government, and they had to do a 2-year projection on their budget, okay? And there are a number of things that we're going to do in here. One of them is doing some forecasting. Another is making sure that we are good with cell referencing and creating some assumptions for these budgets. And let's move over here first of all and scroll over to this area called assumptions. Now I call it a work in process because right here I have my assumptions, okay? And I don't have it set off. I ought to have maybe the cells ought to have some shading in it, put some borders in it to set it off, okay? With me at this point. So I'm looking at G4 down to H9. Now, let's talk about these assumptions for just a moment. This city has some sources of revenue. It has expenses. And so they're trying to figure out, based upon what we assume will be, how will our budget look for the next 2 years? They're in 2001, which is the base period, okay? And then they'll have the next year, which will be 2009. So that's going to be the base period plus 1. And then they're going to have projections for 2010, and that's base period plus 2. Everybody with me so far? Now you'll see the revenue streams and our assumptions about their growth, their increment or their decrement, their growth or their shrinkage. State aid. What this tells you is that every year the amount of state aid is going to be cut 6%. That's why I've got 0.94. So they're assuming that over the next 2 years that they'll get 94, in 2008, they'll get 94% of what they were going to get, of what they got in, pardon me, in 2009, they'll get 94% of what they did in 2008, and then they'll get 90%, then in 2010, they'll get 94% of that. Okay? Then, if you look here, you see employee salaries and benefits. The assumption is that employee salaries and benefits are going to go up 13% a year. So 2009, the salaries and benefits will go up 13%. And then 2010, it will be 13% larger than it was in 2009. You can see we have kind of a disaster about to happen. And then we have all other expenditures are expected to grow. Then we have some miscellaneous receipts. And then we have debt service. That's what they're paying on money they borrowed. That's going to be fixed. And then they have a tax levy, and they have promised that, I think they probably had promised the folks there in that town, we won't raise your taxes any more than 4%. So these are the assumptions with which we're working. Okay? Now, let's scroll down to, and let me take this down just a hair. I've got it up to 242%. And let's go over here. And let's start with the revenues. Okay? Now we have the revenues for 2008, 2009, 2010, and they've got three sources of them. A tax levy, that is the taxes that they levy on folks there in the city. And then they have state aid. This is money that flows to them from the state that they're in. And then they have miscellaneous receipts. Got me so far? Okay. Now, the total of that obviously are the total receipts. And as you can look, you can see that if you follow 2008, 2009, 2010, the total receipts are going down. Pardon me, they're going up. The question is, are they going up fast enough to keep up with the expenses? So let's scroll on down in this pro forma, okay? And then we have disbursements. Now, you remember I called this a work in progress because there's some things I haven't done here, like highlight some key areas, like disbursements. It's a heading, so I ought to highlight it. That's the assumptions area. Probably should have had some fill and have assumptions in bold so it sets it off. Okay, this is still kind of bare bones looking. And then I'll come down to salaries plus benefits, and these are monies that we pay out. And we're going to pay out this much of 1.67 million, 1.667, which is basically 1.67 among friends, then 1.89. And you can see those are going up 13%. Now I want you to notice something. I start with the base year, and then for 2009, all right? Notice that I'm using one of those assumption cells. How do you know? If you look at the formula, you're going to see that I have H6. And that's one of those assumption cells. Now, this is also a work in progress because I haven't used the name manager like I could have. Okay? So I would want to use the name manager to name some of these variables, or at the very least to name the assumptions. You with me so far? Okay. Now, as we look at this, you can see, and then I click on, and here's C21 times H6. So I'm just taking the prior year times the increment or decrement to get the new balance. So I start with a base period, and then I take the base period figure times some increment or decrement, meaning increase or decrease, or if it's flat, I might just say 1.0, and go accordingly. So I've got the police. Now we have a town court. All right. And when we look at this, we see that we've got there's the base figures, it's 2008. And then we've got the H6 again, all right? That's that growth in employee salaries and benefits. And then there's the figure for 2010. And we just follow on down accordingly. Now, if I knowing good practices in terms of cell referencing, it wouldn't be hard for me to just come across this by taking the cell reference for that. For example, there I'm going to take B22 times H6, all right? And then I'm going to have C22 times H6. I just carry it across. I do a drag and drop across vertically, horizontally. Got me? So it saves me some time. That's the value. Now, it's even better if I have a name manager. So if you say, well, could I take this and play with it and put a name manager on some of this stuff and all that? Absolutely. It's a work in progress. And it is, because bare bones didn't have a lot of stuff in it. It should. Here's for the town manager. Same story. Same story here. And we come over to the treasurer, fire department, the library, and then debt service. Debt service is a little bit different. Again, this is a work in progress, and debt service has nothing to do with employee expenses. So what I probably would do to make this look really good, as I'm polishing it up, is I would probably come in and I would insert a row between library and debt service, an empty row, and then I would bold debt service to highlight that I'm looking at a disbursement that's based upon debt. And it's the same because I've borrowed some money and I'm paying $59,000 in interest every year. Everybody got that? So I get it organized. Now I have total disbursements, what I paid out. In business, they call these expenses. In government, they call them disbursements. In business, we call revenue sales. In government, they call it revenue or proceeds. They'll use some different kinds of terms. This budget and this pro forma is what we would call a performance budget. You say, what do you mean? What it means is it lets me look at the financial performance of some governmental entity. Now, when you're out at work, you're going to be dealing with performance budgets for your department, projects, etc. Okay, so we fly on down here, and now we say, okay, we're going to take receipts less disbursements. In other words, the cash that comes in less the cash that goes out the door. And in 2008, we're in good shape. But in 2009, the trouble begins. And then in 2010, the trouble begins. The trouble gets even worse. Okay? Now, as you grow up and continue to go out in the workforce, etc., and you start to listen to what comes out of Washington or Oklahoma City or wherever you live, and you hear somebody say, like in Washington, this is really one of their favorite games. We're going to cut defense budgets by 30%. Now, what they don't tell you is that the Pentagon has come in and said in 2014, we're going to develop an invisible bomber that flies at hypersonic speed. And each one of those will be $100 trillion. And so Congress will say, well, we're only going to give you $70 trillion. That's 15 years down the road, but we've cut the budget. Okay? So you got to be watching for that. Yeah, and I can tell you I had two courses on public finance, public budgeting, and sometimes when I hear what comes out of either one of those places, either one of my capitals, it scares me to death because I go, whew, they have no idea. Okay? I think one of the minutes, one of the OETA, I think they still would publicize the sessions of the State House of Representatives. And as I watched it, I kept feeling like I'm getting clinically depressed. Why? And it dawned on me one day when they were trying to finish up the funding and the budget for the state for, I don't remember what the year is. They had a $200 million tax cut they were going to give everybody. And they had a $200 million deficit. And they just couldn't understand how that happened. Hello? Yeah. So, food for thought. Now, we've got the situation here where we put our ear to the track and we hear the train. We feel the vibrations of the rails. Then we've left our ear there. This is a few minutes earlier, and we can see the train off in the distance and hear the sound. Will we remove our head and ear from that track? I don't know. Will we try to drive through the little barriers like I see people do? I see people do this. They still do it. I'm thinking, what are you thinking? I saw some folks, they were in an SUV. They literally backed up and got themselves in the middle of the track facing the train that was about half a mile away, And I'm hoping that they're going to get through the other side, because if not, it's going to be a bad day for them. Trains are inherently stronger than SUVs. Now, we are looking at this situation and it's not good, all right? And to dramatize our point, or to really draw out what we would want to get people's attention, we could use fill to indicate that. Instead, what we've done is we've used some parentheses, which indicates negative numbers. You got it? So you say, so we could make this look nice. Well, receipts less disbursements, yeah, that probably ought to be bold. And we could use the conditional formatting on the bottom if we chose to, if we thought that someone did not understand what it means by 248,417 in parentheses means I'm in the hole. And so we've talked about about how I could pretty this up and make it look nice, etc. Now let me show you one of the important things, or one of the key things, and the reasons that we do an assumptions area. And as you mentioned, I said before, we could, if we choose, use this to try to say, okay, well, what are the possible outcomes if we change this variable or that variable? How would things look? Well, we have a pro forma here, okay? And right now we're looking at receipts list disbursements, and I'm going to go ahead and just copy this, okay? And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to paste it, just the values. Okay. Let's see. I'm not even going to do that. I'll put this in here because it's got the sum. So I'll just copy this first. And I'm going to come down here to row 42 and put that in. And then I'm just going to put these numbers in. 62. And they're linked to a formula, so I'm not going to mess with them. And then I've got, go back there, and I'm going to put in a minus 248.17, 417, excuse me. And then I'm going to put a minus 609, comma, 808, and then in parentheses. Now I'm right under this, I'm going to write, well, in this, go there to cell A42, and we have receipts less disbursements, and I'm going to write in base case, okay? And then I'm going to come over and click on the home, and I want to find the page layout. And I want to come over here, and I want to merge and center this thing, okay? Or I'll just leave it there. Doesn't matter. Now I have the base case for this, all right? And I have those figures. Now let's go back up to the assumptions area for just a moment, okay? With me? Now I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to say, all right, what will happen? Okay, which of these things are what we would call uncontrollable? I have no control over them. Well, it's easy. State aid is one of them. I can't tell the state what to send me. So I can't count on them if I write them a nice letter, or I go up there and my citizens march up at the state capitol, or I go up there and we testify and blah, 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 that they'll give us any more than what they're going to give us. So that's what we call an uncontrollable variable. Then if we look at all other expenditures, no. So everything else there is within our control. We can do something about salaries and benefits. We could do something about all other expenditures. We can do some things about miscellaneous receipts. We can do some things, debt service we're locked into. We borrowed the money, we got to pay it back with the interest. And then a tax levy. Now the tax levy is kind of a mixture of these, because we promised the people in our city, we will not raise your taxes any more than 4% a year. because people in the city understand this. But now you look and we have this budget crisis that's looming. So now we have to say, all right, of those expenses, well, of the revenue, can we do anything about it? Well, let's take our first doomsday scenario and what we do to get voted out of office, and let's change that tax levy from 1.04 to 1.04 times 1.1. We're going to raise the tax levy. We're going to do a 10% increment. I need to put an equal in front of it, don't I? That would help. There we are. Now we're going to raise the taxes 14.4% a year. You see it? We'll get voted out of office. Hopefully we have a term that lasts 4 years. So when we've balanced the budget, we're heroes. We've balanced the budget, we could say, well, we did the right thing. Okay? Now, let's scroll down and let's see how things look. And now, much better. Right? I'm making money. I have a budget surplus. I end up, when I increase the taxes by 10%, I end up with a budget surplus. Theoretically. Okay? Now, there are differing opinions about this. There are people who say if we cut taxes, rich people will spend more money and we'll all benefit from it. Now, there's a lot of research out there that says that's not true, because unlike rich people of old, when rich people get money now, they don't go out and build a new factory or say, let's put some more money in research and development. They say, let's buy a yacht, buy a plane. I'm talking the rich people. Rich people, rich. Then there's the rest of us. So if we cut their taxes, that $300 million bucks, and the unfortunate thing is it's not productive income. It's income that shows up in a portfolio, a financial portfolio, but it doesn't mean that a company somewhere has created $300 million more of wealth. Let me tell you what wealth is. Wealth is owning 30% of all of the timber in the United States. That's wealth. Owning 40% of all the railroads. That's wealth. Owning 70% of all of the oil in the United States. That's wealth. And it was called Standard Oil. And the man who ran it was a guy named Rockefeller. You hear that some of these people, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, folks like this, they were rich. They owned productive assets. They were so rich that in the late 1890s, the United States government was about to default on its debts because of a banking panic. And these folks on Wall Street got together and went to see the president and said, we'll pledge our personal fortunes, you're good to go. Woo! That's wealthy. Not what you've got in your stock portfolio that day. That'll evaporate in an hour if some program trading wizard goes and takes advantage of it. I guarantee you right now, if you look at the news, you look at the troubles that Amazon's having, there are people out there getting ready to short them so bad it won't even be funny, and they're going to make a ton of money. So we said, okay, we've increased we increased this by 10%, and we end up with a nice surplus. So that's one of our options. Okay, so option one, we had our base case, and then our second was to raise this by 10%. Now, if we want to, on our tax, let's say, let's not be that hard-nosed with these people. Let's just kind of do it. Let's see if we could do a little bit less of a tax. So let's say it equals 1.4 times 1. Let's try 0.5. So we're going to increase them by 5% a year. Let's see what that does for us. Okay? And we're going to scroll down. We'll come on over here. And here we go. Well, we've kind of stopped some of the bleeding. We've got a small deficit in 2009. We've got another deficit in 2010. Someday, this may be you with your company's, but with your departmental budget, maybe a budget on a product you're trying to develop. Who knows? So we say, okay, this isn't good enough. So let's go back up and let's play with this a little bit more. And what we're going to do is, instead of a 5% bump, I'm going to do a 7% bump. And so I'm going to have equals 1.04 times 1.07. With me? And let's see what happens. You say, it can't be this easy. It truly is. And look at that. A modest surplus each year. Now, we told them the taxes would only go up 4%. We took it up a little bit higher, and we've balanced our budget. And we'll have a lot of people squawk at us, but we balanced the budget. Now, we have some other alternatives. One would be to tweak the budget up a little bit and cut some expenses. So let's scroll back up to our assumptions area, okay? And we're going to go back to our original assumptions, and let's come to the tax levy, and let's say we're not going to do a tax levy. We told the public we will not do a tax levy. So we're going to keep it back at 1.04. But we're going to do this. All those people who work as policemen or police people, I guess is what we would call them now, firefighters, we're going to cut their pay a little bit. After all they do is sit around and wait for the phone to ring. Firefighters especially just sit around, they probably have pizza delivered, probably watch daytime TV. They might wash the truck, play with their Dalmatian dog, and throw some sticks. But what good are they really? So let's cut what we're going to give them. So we're going to go back and we're going to tell them, oh, you're not getting 13% a year increase. We're going to take this to 7% a year. Let's see what that looks like. I want 1.07, excuse me. Wow, it would be in 0.07. There we go. So instead of 13%, we went in and we said to the police and to the firemen, yes, you put your lives on the line for us. Yes, if we have a heart attack, you're the people who probably save our lives. Yes, if there's a bump in the night, you come out in the middle of the night with a flashlight and a gun, not knowing if the person there has a knife, a bat, or maybe a shotgun, or maybe they're high or whatever. Just show up and find out, because you're really only worth half of what we're increasing you every year. You go, oh, I see. Well, because we got to balance our budget. And here we go. And we have a modest decrease. We're still, So now let's say, all right, let's spread the pain a little bit. Well, as you can see, I can work out some scenarios to try to take a combination of expense reductions and increments in our tax levy to balance this off. Now, we've got some other expenditures. These are all kinds of things. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to say we have dedicated public services. So instead of 13%, which is an unlucky number, we're going to make it 11%. And then on all other expenditures, it will be, we're going to get that, we're going to take that down to only 2%. And let's see what things look like at the bottom. Still not too bad. We're a little bit, we have a fairly modest a downturn in '09. In 2010, it starts to jump up. But if I compare what's on line 40 versus what's on 42, so far it looks much better. So I'm in a situation where I'm using those assumptions, and since I have it, I don't have to do a minimal computational work. It'll just do it all for me right there. Now I'm going to go ahead and say this. Just to be fair, I'm going to add a tax levy, and instead of 4%, I'm going to do a 5% tax levy. So I'm going to make that equals 1.05, and let's see what happens. Now, one of the other things we could do, and we'll pop down here, we're getting close, not too bad, but we've broken our promise and we're going to get voted out of office. So we'll go back to 1.04. Now, we've got miscellaneous receipts, and we can try to mess with those a little bit. Let's see if we can get those up to 7% and see what that does for us. But can anybody tell me what's the whopper here? What's the big one that I have to worry about? What's the largest amount of money I'm spending on? What am I spending most of my money on? Salaries and benefits, yes. And what's the thing that has the largest increment every year? Salaries and benefits. So I've got to do something about that. This is pretty typical of a service budget or a governmental budget. You're going to have a lot of money tied up in people. Okay? So we're not too bad there at this point. We've looked at, and we'll go back up to our assumptions thing, and we've added, we've taken that and we've added miscellaneous receipts, so we've increased those. We've cut all other expenditures. Debt service, we've kept the taxes where they are. We're now going to have to bite the bullet a little bit more in terms of employee salaries and benefits. So we're going to have to take that down. And I'd say, okay, let's start at 1 plus 0.06. Let's see what that does for us. We're spreading the paint around. And here we have a fairly decent budget. We didn't raise taxes. We did raise some other fees. We said, okay, our personnel is our largest piece of our budget. Personnel is the largest piece of our budget. We're going to reduce it down from a 13% a year growth pattern to 6%. And now we have a very modest looking budget with some additional revenues. And here's the nice thing. If 2009 and we hit $69,000, we have a $69,000 positive variance, what can I do with the $69,000? I'll send the city, I'll send all the elected officials on a paid vacation to Maui, right? We could do infrastructure improvements, or we could do something quite smart. Put the money back for a rainy day. We could take half of it and create a rainy day fund, take the other half of that surplus and feed it into 2010. And we could take 2010, if I took $34,000 there, and all things being equal, then in 2010 I have a surplus of $109,000. And I build a little bit of surplus. So I have kind of a rainy day fund. You with me? All right. We wouldn't be able to think so clearly, and we wouldn't be able to have the comparative data if we hadn't created the pro forma and the assumptions area that lets us play with those variables. And at this point, I'd say, okay, if I'm looking at this, and we'll go back to the assumptions. Again, I'm looking at, okay, the state aid, we're not depending on them. Employee salary and benefits, instead of 13% a year, we brought it down to 6%, okay? And we cut all other expenditures. We bumped up miscellaneous receipts, and we held the line on taxes. and we have some modest surpluses, which we can take and feed. We can do two things with the modest surplus. We can take half of it and put it into a rainy day fund, okay? And I can take the other half and apply it to the next year, carry it over. Let me ask you a question. Can you tell me who was the last president who had a surplus budget for the United States government budget? Yes, Bill Clinton, exactly right. And people said, we've got this nice surplus. Let's pay down the debt. And what did we do with it? Gave people a tax cut. The average tax cut folks got, the average American, was about $20 a week. Now, if you were making big bucks, that tax cut added up. Same thing with our record, with our tax cut. This one we just passed, for the top 1% of Americans got 95% of all of that revenue. The rest of us got 5%. My tax cut's about $30 a week. I really don't know what to do with all that money. But thank goodness that somebody making $1 billion got $200 million of tax cuts, because they need them. After all, isn't it not our role? Isn't it? Shouldn't we have tax policies that punish people for being poor? Anybody? No? Okay. Does anybody know who was president when the GDP was the smallest percentage of overall GDP in the United States? So government had the smallest piece of the total pie. Can anybody tell me who that president was in the past 50 years? Jimmy Carter. Now, if I were to ask you, can you tell me who during his presidency borrowed more money than we had ever been borrowed in the United States in its entire history, all kinds of debt issued? This is true. Can you tell me who it was? It's morning in America. We've borrowed more money than has been lent out in the history of the country. But today, you're better off. That's a shocker, isn't it? More money in 4 years than we have borrowed in the history of the country. All borrowing. And Wall Street had a party. And stocks went up, stuff started happening, and away we went. We pulled ourselves out of that recession. Interesting stuff. But here, when we're working with this simple performance budget, the whole point is this. We use this tool to show us how things might work out if we followed a particular scenario. And we would have been working through these, keeping notes and saying, okay, do we have something that we can agree on? And yes, we do. Now, I asked for $25 billion for what I wanted to build. Then it was $1.7 billion. And today I'm going to sign for $1.2 billion, but I am the greatest negotiator who ever lived. So there we are. There's a lot in this case that we could use. Now, as I had noted to you, a number of things, and this is why I call this a XLS5 WIP, work in progress. First of all is formatting. We would need to format the assumptions area so it quickly catches the eye of the user, okay? Second thing, we want to come down here, and we did a little bit of this in terms of using some bold. We've got some a nice little column, nice little border there that shows us we're coming up to totals. We could do some things to make this look a little more spiffy, a little more understandable, just to pretty it up. So a lot of cosmetic work we could do with this. And it would communicate better. Now, so what you'll want to do is a little bit of the work that we've done here, and you can upload this for your XLSX5. Now, if you want to do some work in terms of prettying it up and formatting it, yes, we're way ahead of when it's due. And go ahead and upload it to make sure you get your credit for the workshop. The assumptions area, the ability to use the cell referencing to alter those final results means we don't have to sit and write a whole bunch of formulas. We've got that. We've got the ability just to come up here and change these assumptions and look and see where we are. That's why we use the area. So all good spreadsheets have an assumptions area, which we have, has a documentation area over here, the city of Clintwood. And then we have the output area. And we're good to go. Yeah. In addition to the name manager, you could, if you want, work with this a little bit and add the dialog box. You say, what in the world are you talking about? Click on data on the data tab, and then you should come across to the right hand side and you should see a thing that says what if analysis. Have you got that? You see it? Click on it. And the what if analysis is a series of tools that lets me work with one piece of data. It's called goal seek. All right. Then it lets me work with several variables. That's the scenario manager. And then we have a thing called a data table, and we'll look at that. And it's kind of like a multiplication table, if you will. And what we'll look at maybe something like, we'll do a capital budget and look at interest rates versus annual net cash flows and how they look given various interest rates and net cash flows over a period of time. But we have these tools, and I would encourage you to play around with them a little bit. Okay, and let me show you, for example, with the goal seek. It's the simplest one. So click that off. I'm going to come down here to cell E39, and I'm going to put sales. And then right below it, I'm going to put COGS, cost of goods sold. Okay, and then right below that, I'm going to put gross. It's my gross receipts. Okay. And so I'm going to come back up, and I'll bring this back up a little bit more. And I've got sales of 100. We'll just keep this simple. And I've got cost of goods sold. Okay. Our cost of goods sold is 40% of our sales. So I'm going to put a minus 40. Okay. And then I'm lazy and I'm going to scroll. I'm going to highlight them and I'm going to come over to home and I'm going to do the auto sum. Now, if I want to, I think I'll do this. I'll go ahead and take them up in terms of the size. So I have sales are 100 and COGS, cost of goods sold, minus 40, and the gross is 60. Let's use goal seek. So go over and click data and click on goal seek. And you'll get the goal seek dialog box. Now it says set sale. That does not mean set sale, although I made it sound like that. Set sale, my target value. So I'm going to click on the little finder here, and my target value is going to be gross. L1. It's that cell beside the gross. Okay? With me? And I want that to value, I want it to be 90. So I'm going to say, okay, how much in sales do I have to get to a gross of 90? I'll click OK. And there we are. Goal seek is a very simple thing. I set a target, and then I identify the cell that I'm going to change, the variable, and I give a value to it. Pardon me, I identify my target, and I identify the value. Then I select the variable that's going to need to change, and I'll let the machine do the work for me. Okay? So that says if I want to have 90,000 in gross, I'm going to have to sell 130,000 bucks. Now, one of the nice things about this is I can use Goal Seek to try and get kind of a very kind of rough and dirty, what we call sensitivity analysis. And I'm going to show you what it will do. Okay? I'm going to go back to sales of 100. All right? And I'm going to click on the what if analysis, and I'm going to do Goal Seek. And I'm going to set the cell, and that's the one beside gross. Okay? And I want it to be 95. Okay? And I'm going to do that by changing the sales. I'm going to do it, pardon me, by changing the COGS. And let's see what happens. Now, if we stay with 100 million and 100,000 or whatever it is in sales, and we get the cost of goods sold down to 5%, then we're going to have the 95%. Now, what we're able to do though is this: we could talk about how much change is there in the gross versus the change that occurs in the COGS. For every dollar I reduce in the cost of goods sold, how much more in gross revenue do I get? And that will tell me how sensitive it is to changes. I could do the same thing with sales. Typically, we'll do this when we're forecasting some numbers, like we've been doing here, that type of thing. This makes sense? Yes? No? Okay, now, I'm going to do something here for just a minute, and get this jewel to, I'll close this off for a minute. This didn't do all that business, so click OK. Yeah, it's not going to let me do anything. I'm going to close this off for just a second, all right? And I want to diminish this. Well, pardon me, I don't. Now, there is a file over in Chapter 2, and it's shown in Figure 215 that it's over in that companion content, and it uses some of those same techniques in terms of doing some forecasting. And you can go over and play with it and upload it for your credit if you choose to. If not, you can upload this file that we worked on today. But I really encourage you at the very least to go over in the textbook and take a look at step by step how they do this. I've been working with spreadsheets a long time, so a lot of this is just second nature to me. But that textbook is excellent because they will literally walk you through step 1, 2, 3, 4 to tell you how to get to the end result they show you in the figure. And it would be good for you to see some of that. And just to really play with it in order to practice with it. That's what it's meant to be there for. Okay? Now I want to diminish this down for a minute, and let's go back into Canvas And I'll close this off. And we'll go back to the modules section. And let's talk about what we've got coming up ahead of us here. You should have uploaded the case for XLS4. Let me ask you, while I've got you here, how many of you see this, how many of you see XLS4 key? You see that? Is there anybody who does not see that? Let me know. It's over in Module 5, and it says it's a file. It says XLS4 key. How many of you see that? Is there anybody that does not? You don't. Week 3, excuse me. Week 3 in the modules. I'm sorry. Week 3. And you should see XLS4 key. Everybody sees that? How about key for XLS4? Okay. I've had some folks in the section B that had some trouble. So if you want to see, well, I'll open it up. This is that file from those practice files I was talking about. And we'll open it up just here and just take a quick tour of it. I'm going to take a look at it here for a moment. Now, this is a little bit different pro forma, and it's a little bit more complicated. What the authors are doing here, and they explain that over in chapter 2, because again, this is shown over in figure 215 in chapter 2. What we're doing here is we're taking a company's income statement, okay, and we're using it to build a company's balance sheet. You say, what do you mean? If you look on these blue cells, you're going to see things like sales growth, initial sales, interest rate. These are figures that we've used to take this base year of 0 and then build the forecasts for sales, okay? And we've done the same thing for cost of goods sold, depreciation, and just to make this, I'm going to go ahead and to make this more vivid, I'm going to go ahead and put a green fill around it. Now you see the green box. What we've done is using the income statement, we do all that work and we end up with the net income based on the assumptions over here in the blue box. Now, we also know that there are items in a company's revenues and its expenses and its balance sheet items that track along with sales and net income. For example, we know that current assets, that's CA, equal 15% of sales. So if I go above here and I say, okay, what are the current assets for this company? Well, the current assets would be, notice this, in year 0 it's 150, which in year 0 is 15% of that 1,000. That's why understanding or kind of seeing these ratios is important, because I can construct balance sheets off of an income statement. So why is that important? Well, what it lets me do is start to take a look at what will the company's financial posture be if we have the kind of operations that we have and with the types of results. Income statements, okay, are a reflection of our operations, running the company, making decisions, selling stuff, shipping it out the door, taking phone calls, etc. The balance sheet is a snapshot of our financial condition at one point in time. So an income statement shows me over a period of time the how things went, beginning of the year, ending of the year. The balance sheet says, how do we, boom, right now. And so we can construct that. We can construct the balance sheet, which will start to give us some sense of performance indicators. Because as you recall, when we did Dabney Financial Services and we compared Walgreens versus CVS, okay, then we were in a position to use those ratios to make a valid comparison of those two firms. Which one should I put my money in? Do you see how this kind of links together? Yes? No? If you do, you're way ahead of a lot of folks out there who don't understand this. Now, I can guarantee you, if any of you are finance, do I have any finance majors in here? None? One, good. I guarantee you that by the time Dr. Reader's through with you, you will be living and breathing this. It will be so second nature, because if you're in an investment firm, all right, and let's say Walmart files their income statement, then you're going to be, let's say that they file their tax statement, their 10K, and they'll have their revenue, their income statement picture, their income statement disclosure, and then their balance sheet disclosures. You'll be wanting to take a look at that and stuff, say, hey, does this make sense? What does it look like? And a lot of that you'll find in the notes where they'll say, well, because of this or that. But our ability to construct a balance sheet lets us say, okay, if I know the company's operations, I can use understanding of the ratios, and I can get a feeling for what's their financial condition. And so what this is about is just basically taking the ratios, building the income statement, and then using that to construct the year 0, year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, you shouldn't also be a finance major. As just a business person, you ought to see this and understand it. Now, and this is just me, I'm more of what you would call a financial management or operations person than I am an investment person. I don't teach investments, never had, never would. I'm more of, okay, if I make these particular decisions, what kind of operating leverage do I achieve, and what kind of financial leverage do I achieve? And that's pretty much it for me. So if I'm looking, so for me personally, I'm interested in cash. Is there cash? Is it generating free cash flows? If it's generating cash, then I can take advantage of opportunities. If I have cash, people will lend me money and let me leverage that money to build a new plant, invest in new products, etc. If I'm cash poor, people won't invest in me. They're nervous. Okay, that's why when you go buy if you haven't bought your first house, when you go buy your first house, they're going to look all at your income. They'll make you show it. They'll want you to see your W-2s, your income tax statement. They'll want to see a copy of your bank account. All of that with an eye to what's the ratio between how much of your gross income, how much of it is free cash flow, unaccounted for, what you haven't spent. Follow me? Can you sustain the payment on the house? Well, I think we've gotten some work done here today. And so you know what you need to upload for 5? And you know what's coming up in terms of this week, if there's some quizzes or things of that nature. I do have, before I let you go, I'm going to give you one more thing I do really want you to take a look at, and it's this. And it's down here in week 5. Pardon me, in week 3, excuse me, week 3. I have some resources for you that will talk about budgets versus forecasts versus projections versus a pro forma. What's the difference between them? And there are some subtle but very important differences. You're going to be asked to build these kinds of things when you go out to work, or you're going to be asked to look at them and evaluate them. So you need to know the difference. Then here's an interesting little ditty on usgovernmentspending.com. Then here's a nice resource about debt versus deficit. Okay. And then the trade deficit, what is that? What do they mean when they say the trade deficit? And then finally, what is Keynesian economics? Now, you're going to take your econ courses here, or if you haven't taken them somewhere else, and you're going to get a steady dose and diet of supply-side economics. There's a man named John Maynard Keynes, long time. He died, he's been dead, I guess, 60, 70 years. But he was one of those people who talked about how do we handle the economy from a macro basis. And Keynes is someone who has a little different take on how we ought to handle interest rates, the amount of money that's out there in the system, etc. And for you to get a balanced view, I think you ought to go study Keynes. One of his most famous sayings was this. He was debating an economics expert who said, well, in the long run, here's what will happen. And Sir Keynes said, yes, but in the long run, we'll all be dead, won't we? Some practical advice. Okay, thank you, my friends. God bless you. I'll see you next week. My computer is like at 1%. Did it? Good.